a village called Oyotunji. The village was known far and wide for its fertile soil, abundant wildlife, and the prosperity of its people. But of all the inhabitants of Oyotunji, none was more renowned than Adebayo. Adebayo was a man whose very name seemed to carry the weight of success. His compound, a sprawling collection of mud brick houses with thatched roofs, stood at the heart of the village. Its walls, decorated with intricate patterns and vibrant colors, were a testament to his wealth and status. Beyond the compound, Adebayo's fields stretched as far as the eye could see, a patchwork of green and gold that rippled in the warm breeze. Every morning as the sun peeked over the eastern hills, Adebayo would stand at the edge of his compound and survey his domain. To his left, vast herds of cattle grazed on grass so lush it seemed to glow in the early light. To his right, endless rows of yams, cassava, and maize promised bountiful harvests. And everywhere he looked, he saw the fruits of his labor and the envy of his neighbors. But Adebayo's wealth extended far beyond his lands and livestock. Within his home, locked away in secret chambers, lay treasures that would make even the most jaded merchant's eyes widen with wonder. Gold nuggets the size of a child's fist, gemstones that captured the colors of the rainbow, and strings of cowrie shells that could buy a small kingdom. All these and more filled Adebayo's coffers. The villagers whispered about Adebayo's wealth, their voices a mixture of awe and resentment. Some said he had made a pact with the river spirits, trading his soul for endless prosperity. Others claimed he had stumbled upon an ancient burial ground, looting the treasures of long-dead kings. But Adebayo knew the truth. His wealth was the result of years of hard work, shrewd trading, and no small amount of luck. Yet for all his riches, Adebayo felt a gnawing emptiness in his heart. Each night, he would retire to his private quarters, surrounded by luxury, but utterly alone. The laughter of children and the warm embrace of a loving wife were absent from his life. As he lay on his plush bed, staring at the intricate patterns on the ceiling, Adebayo began to wonder. What good was all this wealth if he had no one to share it with? This thought, once planted, grew like a seed in fertile soil. It consumed Adebayo's waking hours and haunted his dreams. He found himself watching the other villagers with envy, not for their possessions, but for the joy they seemed to find in their families. The sound of a child's laughter or the sight of a couple walking hand in hand filled him with a longing he could no longer ignore. One crisp morning, as the village bustled with its usual activity, Adebayo made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. He strode purposefully to the village square, his colorful robes billowing behind him, and announced in a voice that carried to every corner of Oyotunji, "I, Adebayo, son of Oladele, seek a wife. Let it be known that I will spare no expense to find a woman worthy of sharing my life and my fortune." The proclamation sent ripples of excitement through the village. Mothers began grooming their daughters, fathers calculated potential bride prices, and eligible young women dreamed of a life of luxury as Adebayo's wife. For weeks, a parade of hopeful candidates made their way to Adebayo's compound, each trying to outshine the others with their beauty, grace, and accomplishments. But Adebayo was not easily impressed. He interviewed each potential bride carefully, looking not just for beauty, but for intelligence, kindness, and a spirit that matched his own ambition. Just when the villagers began to whisper that perhaps Adebayo was too picky, that no woman would ever meet his impossible standards, he found her. Amara arrived at Adebayo's compound on a day when the sun seemed to shine with extra brilliance. From the moment she stepped through the gate, it was clear she was different from the others. Her beauty was undeniable. Skin smooth as polished ebony, eyes that sparkled like stars in the night sky, and a smile that could melt the hardest heart. But it was more than her physical appearance that captured Adebayo's attention. As they talked, Adebayo found himself captivated by Amara's quick wit and sharp mind. She spoke of poetry and philosophy, of dreams and ambitions that matched his own. When she laughed, it was as if music filled the air. For the first time in his life, Adebayo felt a connection that went beyond the material world. The courtship was swift and passionate. Adebayo spared no expense in wooing Amara, showering her with gifts and attention. He commissioned the finest griots to compose songs in her honor and hired artisans to create jewelry that would accentuate her beauty. The entire village watched in awe as the once solitary Adebayo was transformed by love. Their wedding was a spectacle unlike anything Oyotunji had ever seen. For 7 days and 7 nights, the village celebrated. Drums echoed through the hills, bonfires lit up the night sky, and the aroma of roasted meats and fragrant stews filled the air. Adebayo's generosity knew no bounds. Even the poorest villager ate like a king during the festivities. As Amara took her place as the mistress of Adebayo's compound, it seemed that his life was finally complete. The empty halls now rang with laughter and song. Amara's presence brought a warmth and life to the home that all the gold in the world could not buy. For a time, Adebayo knew true happiness. But the human heart is a curious thing, and contentment can be as fleeting as morning mist. As the months passed, Adebayo found his thoughts straying. He would watch Amara as she moved through their home, radiant in her beauty and grace, and a strange thought would creep into his mind. If one wife could bring such joy, wouldn't 2 bring even more? The idea, once formed, refused to leave him. Adebayo tried to push it away, to focus on the happiness he had found with Amara. But like a persistent itch, it always returned. He began to imagine his compound filled with the laughter of multiple wives, each bringing her own unique qualities to his life. The more he thought about it, the more appealing the idea became. One evening, as Adebayo and Amara sat on the veranda watching the sunset, he finally voiced his thoughts. "My love," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "have you ever considered that our home might benefit from another woman's presence? A sister wife to share your duties and keep you company?" Amara's reaction was not what Adebayo had hoped for. Her eyes, usually so warm and loving, turned cold as she stared at him in disbelief. "Are you not happy with me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Have I not given you everything a wife should?" Adebayo rushed to reassure her, showering her with compliments and declarations of love. He spoke of expanding their family, of bringing more joy into their lives. But Amara remained unconvinced. That night, for the first time since their marriage, they slept with a wall of silence between them. Despite Amara's clear disapproval, Adebayo could not shake the idea of taking another wife. He told himself that Amara would come around once she saw the benefits. And so, with a mixture of excitement and guilt, he began his search for a second bride. It was during a trip to a neighboring village that Adebayo met Zuri. She was everything Amara was not. Where Amara was thoughtful and reserved, Zuri was vivacious and outgoing. Her laughter could be heard above the din of the busy marketplace, and her dance moves captivated everyone who saw her. Adebayo was instantly smitten. The courtship of Zuri was conducted in secret, away from Amara's watchful eyes. Adebayo showered Zuri with gifts, each more extravagant than the last. He whispered promises of a life of luxury and endless parties. Zuri, dazzled by Adebayo's wealth and charm, agreed to become his second wife. When Adebayo finally brought Zuri home, the reaction was explosive. Amara, upon seeing the new woman draped in gold and finery, flew into a rage. She accused Adebayo of betrayal, of making a mockery of their love. The compound, once a haven of peace, echoed with shouts and the crash of breaking pottery. For weeks, tension hung over Adebayo's home like a storm cloud. Amara retreated into cold silence, speaking to Adebayo only when absolutely necessary. Zuri, initially cowed by Amara's fury, soon began to assert herself, demanding equal treatment and attention. Adebayo found himself caught between two strong-willed women, each pulling him in a different direction. But even as he struggled to maintain peace in his home, Adebayo felt a strange exhilaration. The drama, the passion, the constant need to navigate the complex emotions of his wives. It all made him feel more alive than he had in years. And so, instead of trying to resolve the situation, he began to wonder, why stop at 2? Nia came next, a statuesque beauty with skin the color of midnight and a voice that could charm birds from the trees. Then came Imani, petite and fiery, with a talent for numbers that soon had her managing Adebayo's accounts. With each new wife, the dynamics in the compound shifted and changed, alliances forming and breaking like sand dunes in the wind. Adebayo's appetite seemed insatiable. He traveled far and wide, always on the lookout for a new woman to add to his collection. Some came willingly, seduced by promises of wealth and status. Others were more reluctant, their families swayed by generous bride prices and the prestige of being connected to the great Adebayo. Before long, Adebayo had 12 wives, each more stunning than the last. His compound, once spacious, now seemed cramped with the addition of so many women and their attendants. The air was constantly filled with a cacophony of voices, laughter, arguments, songs, and whispered conspiracies. At first, Adebayo reveled in the chaos. He saw himself as the sun around which these beautiful planets orbited, basking in their combined light and warmth. Each wife brought something unique to his life. Amara, her wisdom; Zuri, her joy; Nia, her grace; Imani, her intellect. He convinced himself that this was the life he had always wanted, that his happiness was finally complete. But as the moons passed, things began to change. The novelty of juggling multiple wives began to wear thin, replaced by the constant stress of managing their competing needs and desires. Adebayo found himself spending more and more time mediating disputes, soothing hurt feelings, and trying to maintain some semblance of harmony in his increasingly fractious household. Moreover, the financial strain of maintaining such a large family began to make itself felt. Adebayo's wives, accustomed to luxury, demanded only the best: the finest clothes, the most expensive jewels, lavish feasts, and extravagant gifts. Each tried to outdo the others, their rivalry extending to every aspect of life in the compound. To meet these ever-increasing demands, Adebayo began to dip into his reserves. He sold a field here, a few cows there, always telling himself that his fortune would last forever. But like water draining from a cracked gourd, his wealth began to seep away. The first sign of real trouble came on a sweltering afternoon at the height of the dry season. Adebayo was in his private chamber poring over his accounts with a growing sense of unease when a commotion in the courtyard drew his attention. He emerged to find 2 of his wives, Zuri and Imani, engaged in a heated argument that seemed on the verge of turning physical. "You thieving witch!" Zuri screamed, her face contorted with rage. "I know you took my golden armlets. Return them at once, or I'll scratch those lying eyes out of your head." Imani, usually so composed, was red-faced and trembling with anger. "How dare you accuse me, you empty-headed peacock? Perhaps if you spent less time preening and more time thinking, you'd remember where you misplaced your trinkets." As Adebayo rushed to separate them, he noticed the other wives watching from the shadows, their eyes glittering with a mixture of fear and something that looked unsettlingly like anticipation. It was at that moment that he realized the delicate balance he had been maintaining was beginning to crumble. From that day forward, incidents of conflict became more frequent and more intense. Accusations of theft flew back and forth. Prized possessions mysteriously disappeared, only to reappear in another wife's quarters. Meals became battlegrounds, with each wife trying to curry Adebayo's favor through increasingly elaborate dishes, regardless of the cost. Adebayo found himself constantly on edge, never knowing when the next explosion would occur. He took to sleeping in a different wife's quarters each night, hoping to maintain some semblance of fairness, but this only led to more jealousy and resentment. The once happy compound became a powder keg, ready to explode at the slightest spark. As if the internal strife wasn't enough, nature seemed to turn against Adebayo as well. A prolonged drought withered his crops, turning his once lush fields into a wasteland of cracked earth and stunted plants. His cattle, usually fat and healthy, grew thin and sickly, their ribs visible through dull hides. Adebayo, determined to maintain the lifestyle his wives had grown accustomed to, began to take risks. He invested heavily in trade caravans, hoping for big returns. But the caravans were beset by bandits, and much of his investment was lost. He lent money to other villagers at high interest rates, only to find that many could not repay their debts. As his financial troubles mounted, Adebayo's temper grew short. He snapped at his wives over the smallest infractions, his once legendary generosity replaced by a miserly scrutiny of every cowrie shell spent. The wives, sensing the change in their fortunes, began to scheme and plot, each trying to secure her own future at the expense of the others. It was in this atmosphere of tension and uncertainty that disaster struck. One night, as Adebayo tossed and turned on his bed, unable to sleep for worry, a great storm swept through the village. Lightning split the sky, and thunder shook the very foundations of the earth. In the chaos of the tempest, a bolt of lightning struck Adebayo's granary, setting it ablaze. By the time the villagers managed to extinguish the fire, it was too late. The granary, along with the entire harvest it contained, was reduced to ashes. As Adebayo stood before the smoldering ruins, he felt a piece of his soul turn to ash as well. How would he feed his family now? How would he maintain the lifestyle his wives demanded? But fate, it seemed, was not finished with Adebayo. The very next day, as he stumbled through his fields in a daze, he made a horrifying discovery. Half of his remaining cattle were gone, stolen in the night by thieves who had taken advantage of the storm's confusion. The sight of the empty pastures, once filled with the lowing of healthy cows, brought Adebayo to his knees. As news of these calamities spread through the compound, the fragile peace that had been maintained shattered completely. Adebayo's wives, realizing that their comfortable lives were in jeopardy, turned on each other with renewed viciousness. Accusations flew, fingers pointed, and long-simmering resentments boiled over into open hostility. Amara, who had watched the unfolding disaster with sad, knowing eyes, approached Adebayo as he sat alone in his chamber, his head in his hands. "My husband," she said softly, "this cannot continue. You must make a choice. Send the others away. Keep only me, and we will weather this storm together as we once did." But before Adebayo could respond, Zuri burst into the room, her eyes wild. "Don't listen to her, my love. It's Amara who should go. She's old and bitter. Keep me and I'll dance away your sorrows. We'll start anew and I'll give you strong sons to rebuild your fortune." One by one, the other wives joined the fray, each pleading her case, each demanding that Adebayo choose her above all others. Their voices rose in a cacophony of pleas and threats, promises and accusations. The room, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage closing in around Adebayo. As he looked from face to face, Adebayo realized with a sinking heart that he no longer recognized these women. The love and admiration that had once shone in their eyes had been replaced by fear, greed, and desperation. These were not the wives he had cherished, but strangers wearing familiar faces. In that moment, something broke inside Adebayo. The weight of his mistakes, the consequences of his greed and folly, came crashing down upon him. He saw with terrible clarity the ruin he had brought upon himself and those around him. The wealth he had accumulated, the status he had cultivated, the family he had built, all of it now felt like ashes in his mouth. Unable to bear the accusations and pleading any longer, Adebayo fled from the room. He ran through the compound, past startled servants and curious children, until he reached the gates. There, he paused, looking back at the home that had once been his pride and joy. In the fading light of day, it looked shabby and diminished, a pale shadow of its former glory. A plan, desperate and cowardly, began to form in Adebayo's mind. He could not face the disaster he had created. He could not choose between his wives or bear the thought of watching his children grow up in poverty and strife. There was only one option left: to run. Under the cover of darkness, Adebayo crept back into his compound. With shaking hands, he gathered what little wealth remained: a few gold trinkets, a pouch of gemstones, some strings of cowrie shells. He worked quickly and quietly, always listening for the approach of footsteps, dreading discovery. As the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Adebayo took one last look at his sleeping wives and children. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered a silent goodbye. Then, like a thief in the night, he slipped away from the life he had built and the responsibilities he could no longer bear. The village of Oyotunji awoke to a scene of chaos and heartbreak. 12 wives, dozens of children, all abandoned. The compound, that had once been the envy of the village, now stood as a monument to Adebayo's folly. Wails of anguish filled the air as the full impact of Adebayo's desertion became clear. In the days that followed, the true extent of Adebayo's financial ruin came to light. Debts that had been hidden, loans that could not be repaid, fields and cattle that had been mortgaged, all of it came crashing down upon the heads of his abandoned family. The wives, once rivals, found themselves united in their struggle to survive. Amara, the first wife, emerged as a leader in this time of crisis. With quiet strength and determination, she began to put the pieces of their shattered lives back together. She organized the other wives, assigning tasks and responsibilities. Together, they worked the remaining fields, tended the few animals that were left, and sought ways to generate income. The children, initially confused and hurt by their father's disappearance, gradually adjusted to their new reality. Older siblings took care of younger ones, and a new sense of family began to emerge from the ashes of Adebayo's desertion. The village, which had once looked upon Adebayo's family with envy and resentment, now rallied around them. Neighbors offered help with planting and harvesting. The village elders provided counsel and support. Slowly, painfully, Adebayo's abandoned family began to rebuild their lives. As for Adebayo himself, his fate became the subject of rumor and speculation. Some said he had been seen in distant lands, a ragged figure muttering about lost riches and the weight of too many wives. Others claimed he had been devoured by wild animals or fallen prey to bandits. A few even whispered that he had been struck down by the gods, punished for his greed and abandonment of his family. Years passed, and Adebayo's name became a cautionary tale in Oyotunji and the surrounding villages. Parents would tell their children the story of the man whose greed for wives led him to ruin, warning them about the dangers of excessive ambition and the true meaning of wealth. But life has a way of coming full circle, and fate often has surprises in store, even for those who think their story has ended. It was on a sweltering afternoon, nearly a decade after Adebayo's disappearance, that a stranger appeared at the gates of the compound. He was a sorry sight. Clothes tattered, feet bare and bleeding, face weathered by years of hardship. But there was something familiar about his bearing, something in the set of his shoulders and the look in his eyes that caused the guards to hesitate. As word spread through the compound, people began to gather. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Could it be? After all this time, the wives, now gray-haired and careworn, pushed their way to the front. Children who had been infants when Adebayo left, now on the cusp of adulthood, craned their necks to get a better look. It was Amara who finally stepped forward, her eyes narrowed as she studied the stranger's face. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then, with a mixture of shock, anger, and something that might have been relief, she spoke a single word. Adebayo. The prodigal husband had returned. Adebayo fell to his knees, his body racked with sobs. He begged for forgiveness, pleading with his wives and children to allow him back into their lives. He spoke of the hardships he had endured, of the lessons he had learned, of the deep regret that had haunted his every step since the day he fled. The reactions were as varied as the individuals present. Some of the wives turned away in disgust, unable to forgive the man who had abandoned them. Others wept, torn between anger and a love they thought long dead. The children, now young adults, regarded this broken man with a mixture of curiosity and resentment. He was their father, yet a stranger. It was Imani, once the youngest and most hot-tempered of the wives, who surprised everyone. She stepped forward, helped Adebayo to his feet, and led him into the compound. "Come," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You have much to answer for, but for now you need rest and food." In the days that followed, Adebayo's return sent ripples through the community. The village elders convened to discuss what should be done. Some argued that he should be banished, punished for his desertion. Others, remembering the man he had once been, advocated for mercy. As for Adebayo's family, they struggled to come to terms with his sudden reappearance. Long-buried emotions resurfaced, old wounds reopened. There were heated arguments, tears, and moments of unexpected tenderness. The children in particular found themselves on an emotional roller coaster, alternating between a longing to know the father they had lost and anger at his abandonment. Adebayo, for his part, accepted whatever came his way with humility. He worked alongside his children in the fields, no longer the proud landowner, but a simple farmhand. He listened to his wives' recounting of the hardships they had endured, accepting their anger and bitterness without complaint. At night, he slept in a small hut at the edge of the compound, a far cry from the luxurious quarters he had once occupied. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. Adebayo's unwavering dedication to making amends, his willingness to humble himself and work tirelessly for the family he had once abandoned, began to soften some hearts. Children who had at first refused to acknowledge him began to seek his advice or share stories of their lives. Wives who had sworn never to speak to him again found themselves engaging in cautious conversations. It was Amara who finally gave voice to what many were feeling. On a quiet evening, as the family gathered for their meal, she stood and addressed Adebayo directly. "You left us," she said, her voice carrying years of pain and resilience. You shattered our lives and forced us to rebuild from nothing. That pain, that betrayal, will always be a part of our story. She paused, looking around at the faces of her co-wives and children. But you have also returned. You have worked to earn a place among us again. And perhaps, there is still a place for you here. Her words opened the floodgates. For hours, the family talked, argued, cried, and eventually began to heal. It was agreed that Adebayo would be allowed to stay, not as the head of the family, but as a member working to regain trust and rebuild relationships. As the years passed, the compound once again became a place of laughter and life, though in a very different way than before. The family's wealth, while modest, compared to Adebayo's former riches, was built on a foundation of hard work, mutual respect, and genuine affection. The wives, once rivals, had become sisters in all but blood, their shared struggles having forged unbreakable bonds. Adebayo, older and wiser, found a contentment he had never known in his days of wealth and excess. He delighted in the achievements of his children, marveled at the strength and wisdom of his wives, and thanked the gods every day for the second chance he had been granted. And so, my children, this is the tale of Adebayo, a story of greed and redemption, of folly and wisdom. Remember its lessons well. True wealth is not measured in gold or wives, but in the love of family and the contentment of a life well lived. Greed can cost you everything, but humility and perseverance can lead you back to what truly matters. As you go forth into the world, carry this story in your hearts. May it guide you to appreciate what you have, to treat others with kindness and respect, and to understand that it's never too late to right your wrongs and find your way back home.